we dig into anything, let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer, shall we? Father, we thank you for the blessings that you give to us. We're thankful for our time of study in the middle of the week. We are certainly thankful for this gospel that gives us such information to build our faith, to better serve our King Jesus Christ. Help our shepherds as they're watching over us. Be with each and every member of this congregation and all the tender souls that we watch for, we help, we strive to serve. Father, we ask that you would be glorified in us and through us and be with us in our study tonight. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, John chapter 4. Now let's kind of remember a couple of things. In John 3, we have Jesus interacting with the top of the religious order, Nicodemus. John 4 then, he goes to the other end of the spectrum. He goes from the religious leader, Nicodemus, a teacher in Israel, part of the Sanhedrin. Now he goes to a Samaritan woman. Guys, it does not get any more drastic than that. But what's the subliminal point? What's the idea here? Both people are candidates for the gospel. It doesn't matter whether he's the religious leader. He needs to be radically transformed. He needs to be born again. And it doesn't matter if you're a wayward, hybrid child of Israel like this Samaritan woman, caught up in all sorts of immorality. I know I'm kind of playing my hand here a little early. I hadn't told you all that yet. But hopefully you read it before. And what's the point? Even this woman is a recipient of the gospel. Everybody can be a candidate for our King. And so that's part of what's working on here. Just make sure you see that. Okay, John 3, top of the order. John 4, bottom of the order. And yet both can get the gospel through Jesus Christ. So John 4, verse 1. Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself did not baptize, but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again to Galilee. But he needed to go through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Let's stop there. Lots going on already. I want you to think with me for a second. Verse 1, we're told something pretty incredible. And then in verse 6, we're told something almost at the opposite end of the discussion, equally incredible. So what am I thinking here? Verse 1, what's something revealed about Jesus in verse 1? And he didn't baptize anybody, okay. But think with me a little bit about what he says there. Verse 1, what kind of starts this whole discussion, this whole story progressing forward in verse 1? Okay, he's made more disciples than John. Verse 1, notice this. Therefore, when the Lord knew. I want you to think about that. You know, we ended John 1, that's how John 1 ends. The Lord knew what was in man, right? I'm sorry, the end of John 2. The end of John 2 ends with, the Lord knew what was in man. Well, now, chapter 4, verse 1, emphasized again, the Lord knew. But notice what he knows. He knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John. Verse 2, though Jesus himself did not baptize, but his disciples. I want you to think about this. Part of what's being stressed is Jesus knows. He is omniscient. He is all-knowing. Okay? Jesus is God in the flesh. That's John 1:14. And so Jesus knows things that were he not God, he would not know. But here's where you have to really notice what's being stated in the verse. Not only does Jesus know perfectly, Jesus knows that the Pharisees have heard a rumor that's not true. Did you catch that? So Pharisees, he knew that the Pharisees had heard Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John. But, verse 2, Jesus didn't baptize them. His disciples were baptizing them. He knew. So not only did he know what the Pharisees had been told, he knew that what they had been told was inaccurate. Boy, now think about that for a second. We're talking about what Jesus knows. Well, that's a little bit of what we're getting in the verse. Now, once in a while, we'll tie this back in with some of the things we've talked about several times already. This is part of that baptism that John did, part of the baptism that Jesus did in John 3. This is not New Testament Christian baptism. But once in a while, individuals will tie Christian baptism to what's happening here, and they'll try to say things like, well, see, wasn't that important? Wasn't that important? Jesus didn't even do it himself. That misses the point. You think about the practical side of this. What would it do to people in the first century world if they could go around telling people, I was baptized by Jesus? Anybody pulling that card out at the dinner table? Oh, I'm sorry, we're having a conversation. I was baptized by Jesus. So you don't get to talk no more. Okay? So, a little bit of that maybe, no, he's going to head all that off. Same idea kind of comes around with the Apostle Paul, doesn't it? 1 Corinthians 1, Paul says, I'm glad I didn't baptize any of you, except for just a couple of people. And what was he talking about? Because there were divisions in Corinth. I am of Paul, I am of Apollos, I am of Cephas. And he goes, you guys are missing it. You're missing it. Not that he's diminishing baptism, but that they were missing the point. Okay? So part of the point I'm making is just don't read beyond the text. Okay, that would miss the point. It's not fair to this text, and this is not at all the point that's being made. So he left Judea and departed again to Galilee. Maybe something to kind of think about. I made this comment earlier. We've got a lot of stuff John's recording for us that the synoptic gospels don't record. You get Jesus has this big official calling of the disciples, and then Jesus begins his Galilean ministry. That's how the synoptics record that. But when we come over to John, we find out, he's already interacted some with these disciples, and maybe had kind of a unofficial following for a little bit before he actually called them to the work. Maybe even think about it like this. They followed him, but they weren't following him full time yet. Does that make sense? Because you got to go over to Luke 5 when he calls Peter, and he calls some of the fishermen there with Peter, and it's like, man, a lot of faith. Absolutely a lot of faith. But they had already interacted with Jesus some by then. Okay? That's where John's gospel kind of helps us a little. So that's some of what's going on here. He leaves Judea, so he leaves the Jerusalem area, and he's going back to Samaria, or going back to Galilee. Verse 4, he needed to go through Samaria. Here's a map. Let me just kind of, this may be helpful here. Here's a map of what we're talking about. So you have this area. Here is Jerusalem. Okay. Here, right around this area, is where this well is. And up here is Galilee. The green color. Green color? Green color? Green. Nobody's disagreeing, but you colorblind guys were nodding. So y'all saw it too. Okay. So he's going to Galilee. Now here's sometimes the way this is presented. Right here is the river. And sometimes what they would do, Jews would leave Jerusalem, and because they hated the Samaritans so much, what they'd do is they'd cross the river, and they would go up the river to go into Galilee. I'm not sure that that's really what's going on. I mean, if you're looking at this, you can see the topography in this picture, can't you? Look at all these mountains. You see all those mountains? Well, now you see all the red squigglies. You see all the mountains? Is it easier to walk through the mountains, or is it easier to walk through... Yeah, it's easier to walk around the riverside, isn't it? A little smoother country. Just don't read into it. Don't read into all those things. We got plenty of information to say the Jews hated the Samaritans, and we're going to get to that. But I think the bigger idea here is Jesus had to go through this area. Boy, it makes me wonder. Verse 1, look at what he knows. Makes me wonder if he knows there's a woman at a well that he needs to talk to. Now again, don't take that beyond what's revealed. But boy, that's what's kind of in the back of my mind reading this text. Okay? And so he's going to go to the city of Samaria. I said to a city of Samaria, verse 5, to Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave his son Joseph. There was a well there, verse 6. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. So notice something. I started here. Verse 1, something incredible mentioned. Jesus is omniscient. Verse 6, something else incredible is mentioned. Other end of the spectrum. Jesus is also tired. He's wearied from his journey. You walk across that line right there that's on the screen, I bet you're going to be tired too. And so they get there about noon, the 6th hour of the day, and they're tired. Jesus in particular is tired, but man, just, do we really stop and think about the pressures that were on Jesus day in and day out? Never, ever, ever gives in to sin. Never relaxes mentally enough to be a victim of sin, to be fooled or duped by Satan. Never gives in. And on top of that, he's being surrounded by, there's no little ones in here, being surrounded a lot by a whole lot of stupidity. Every time he turns around, one of his disciples says something dumb to him, and he goes, "Oh, come here, dummy. Come here. That's not what you're supposed to think. That's not what you're supposed to do." And every time he turns around, he's got these antagonistic individuals. You know how exhausting it would have been to be Jesus? Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons why. You get to the well here, and he is wore out, middle of the day. But verse 7, a woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus says to her, "Give me a drink." Now, part of what's going on here, you almost have questions that immediately come to your mind. But they're going to be answered by some of the things that are filled in verse 8 and 9. His disciples had gone away to the city to buy food. So why does he ask this woman for something? Because his disciples aren't there. And in verse 9, she's dumbfounded by this. "You're a Jew asking for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman, for Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." I want you to notice something. John does a remarkable job of showing us how divisive this situation was. You think we know about bigotry and hatred and divisions in our country? We ain't got nothing on first century Jews. Notice in the text with me, how many times does it stress Samaria or Samaritan? Did you catch it already? In the first 9 verses, guys, it's just about every few lines. Verse 4, he had to go through Samaria to a city of Samaria. Verse 5, verse 7, a woman of Samaria. Verse 9, a woman of Samaria, a Samaritan woman, and no dealings with Samaritans. You see in this? It's a drumbeat through this passage. Yeah, these Samaritans, these Jews, they don't get along. So let's think for a moment. Couple of reasons why this is. Who are the Samaritans? A mixed race. There we go. A mixed race. You know how offensive that would have been to the Jews? Because what did the Jews pride themselves on? We are a pure-blooded people. We are the faithful children of Abraham. Our blood's not been mixed with the heathens. And what about the Samaritans? No. Northern nation was unfaithful. The Assyrians decimated them. This entire area we're looking at, Samaria. They were decimated by the Assyrians, and they were repopulated by the Assyrians. And so they brought in a bunch of Gentiles, and what happened? They all intermarried, creating this hybrid people. Were not true Jews, were not carrying the true blood of Abraham, and a whole lot of hatred was happening. Okay? Now all of that gets 1,000,000,000% amplified by the tension and turmoil between the northern nation and southern nation. Y'all do know that like the northern nation and southern nation hated each other even before all of that stuff happened. I mean, it's like David sneezed wrong, and what did the northern nation want to do? Okay, that's it, we're done. The king sneezed funny, and I'm out. All right? That was sarcasm, and it was supposed to be a lot funnier than that. So you have this animosity between the north and the south, okay? And then you have all the stuff happen with Assyria. All of that's amplified even more because in Ezra chapter 4, what happens? The people come home from exile, and those people who were living in the north, these hybrid people, they come down and they go, "Hey, we'll help you rebuild the temple." And what do the Jews who came home from exile say? No thanks. We'll do it on our own. We'll just do it ourselves. And so what did they do? They built their own temple at Mount Gerizim. Okay? That's going to come up in a minute, by the way. So we have our own worship center. We don't go to Jerusalem. Now all of this, have I stressed this well enough yet? All of this gets amplified one more notch because in Samaritan world, they did not believe in the full Old Testament. The Samaritans believed in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, but did not subscribe to the prophets and didn't have a whole lot of regard for the histories. So they looked at the 5 books of Moses and said, that's it, basically. All right, now y'all seeing how all of that plays in. There's a reason the Jews hated the Samaritans, and the feelings were pretty much mutual. Okay? Go ahead, Julie.
Okay, so why weren't the Samaritans considered like the first set of Gentiles?
Well, here's what's funny is, in some ways, they were treated like Gentiles. In fact, that's going to come up in verse 9. That little last line, for the Jews have no dealings with Samaritans, there's a lot of ambiguity there. The word that's used, this is the only place in the Bible it's used. Okay? But we go to some secular history and we can find out how the word's used. The idea is not so much that we don't have any interactions, it's that we don't share things. So think about this. Think about this. To a Jew, now they're going to go buy stuff from the Samaritans. Y'all saw that, didn't you? The disciples went and bought stuff from the Samaritans. So this isn't about just interaction. It's about cleanliness. So the Gentiles, unclean, right? Well, Samaritans, generally speaking, were also considered unclean. And not to get too graphic, but first century Judaism hated the Samaritans so much, they actually considered every Samaritan woman unclean because she did not follow the menstrual cycle stuff for the cleanliness in the Old Testament. So, you want to talk about controversial. What happens with a well? Some of y'all folks that maybe go way back to the well days, everybody shares the same ladle, right? So the issue here is not so much he interacting with this woman, although that's pretty controversial in one way. The issue is he's asking for a drink from the same ladle. Now that's controversy. Okay? And so that's part of what's going on here. They are considered unclean, the Jews. Right? That's feeding into that tension. In fact, I've only captured just a part of this. Rabbis don't talk to women. They don't interact with a woman. That is uncouth. Okay? And here he is, rabbi, interacting with this woman. There's just a lot of things going on here that feed into this animosity. Okay? Now, let's think for a moment. We're going to find out some other things about this woman in just a moment. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I do want us to just lay this groundwork right now. It's about noon, and this woman is at the well. Generally speaking, the women would go to the wells early in the morning or late in the evening, and they would generally go as a group. Okay? We're getting some subliminal messages here. Something's off. Something's off. We don't know what yet. We hadn't read that far, but something's off because she's not with a group of women, and she's coming in the middle of the day. Every one of us should have little flags going up that say, hey, wait a minute, something's off here. What's going on? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say it now. It's because she's living a whole lot of immorality. And Samaritans, as ungodly as they were, they didn't tolerate that sort of stuff either. So what happens? Yeah, she's just going to go get water by herself. Okay, she's an outsider in every sense of the word. Remember how we started this class? You got Nicodemus at the top. This woman's at the bottom. Are you getting a little bit of that now? She's at the very bottom. Guys, she's not just rejected from the Jews, but the hint here, she's rejected from the Samaritans too. Okay? Questions on any of that? That was kind of a lot. There's a lot going on there. But a lot of that's also going to come back up in just a minute because of some of the things that's mentioned. Okay? So just kind of tuck some of that away. It's going to return. So, he asked her, or he tells her, give me a drink, and then she's dumbfounded by this. That probably was only just a hint of it, because verse 10, she's going to get dumbfounded her. I don't think that's a word. Verse 10, notice this. Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God, and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. So you just thought you were dumbfounded, lady. When Jesus starts opening his mouth and talking, everybody gets confused because they're not listening. They're not hearing what he's actually saying. So he says, you're asking the wrong questions. She's asking, why are you talking to me? You're a Jew. I'm a Samaritan. I'm a woman. We don't. The law of Moses. Maybe he's pulling on some of that a little bit here. But anyway, he says, know the gift and know him who speaks to you. What have we been circling around all through John? Who is Jesus? Everybody wants to know, who's Jesus? Because that's the all-important question. Is he the Christ? And if so, what does that mean? Well, you're getting some of it right here. It's the gift of God. This man who speaks to you says, give me a drink. You would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Sometimes the expressions we see in Scripture sometimes kind of trip us up a little bit. The idea of living water is the idea of running water. Okay? Or even the idea of life-giving water, which in a Jewish mind would have been running water. What do you not want in a culture, in a world like that? You don't want placid water. That's because it makes you sick. What do you want? You want running water, living water, good water, healthy water. And what is he talking about? That's exactly what he's talking about. In fact, just think about this for a moment. A lot of these ideas are coming out of the Old Testament. Okay? You have a lot of Old Testament passages that talk about the time of the Messiah. And what does it paint that image of? Lots of water. Lots of water. Done some work on Psalm 1 recently. The righteous man, the godly, will be planted by rivers of water. Oh, you getting that? I mean, right here, we're talking about some of those same ideas. Okay? So here he is. He says, if you knew, you'd be asking a totally different question. Okay? So she says, verse 11, Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock? Part of what goes on in these couple of verses is the same thing that really goes on today. Jesus is speaking about spiritual things. He's on this level. And what does the woman listening hear? Physical things. Physical level. Whoa, living water? You mean I don't have to come draw water anymore? Yes, please. Sign me up for 2 pails. Okay? You seeing that? So she's working. I'm not getting this. Where do you get that living water? This well's deep. In fact, in modern times, they have found what they believe is this well. And from all the information given, they're probably pretty accurate. This Jacob's well in particular has been well known pretty much throughout history. It was 100 feet deep now. So, woof, how deep must that rascal have been when this woman's talking about it? And here's this man who is tired from a journey, sitting here on the ground and saying, I can provide you living water. You know how confusing that would have been? This conversation started because you asked me for a drink. But now you're offering living water? Are y'all seeing sometimes why the individual talking to Jesus is confused? Because he's talking at a whole other level. Okay? Not that he didn't dumb it down for people, because he does. He dumbs it down big time sometimes. But he's just working towards a whole different thing, and she doesn't get it. That's why she says in verse 12, are you greater than our father Jacob? And notice that, our father Jacob. Y'all see that? The Samaritans called themselves descendants of Jacob too, and they were. They just weren't a pure-blooded people anymore. They had married into the Gentiles, the pagans that had come into the land, and, by the way, carried in some of those practices. And so she says, are you greater than our papi? And yeah, it just kind of misses the point altogether. He drank from it himself, fed his sons, his livestock. Jesus says, verse 13, He answered and said to her, Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. You notice how he's incrementally taking this one notch further. She's saying this, and he's saying, okay, come with me a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further. We'll go one notch deeper. And so, you see him almost progressing out of the physical thing into the spiritual truth he's trying to get across. So you're thinking of this temporal water? No, you're missing the point. I can give you water, and you'll never thirst again. Now, I want you to think for a minute. What would that mean to a person who lives in an arid part of the world, who lives and dies by the well? You know, you get sick of doing something you have to do every day. You remember your grandparents talking about the outhouse days? You talk about it just, it's part of life, but at the same time, it's like, this is awful. This is awful. Every time I need to go to the restroom, I've got to go all the way out to the outhouse. Guys, when you're living in a well world, that was fun to say. When you're living in that kind of a world, everything you do involves you walking out of town to the main well water for the whole city. And once you get there, you got to wait for it. Now, here's what's funny. Part of that's almost a social thing, especially for women who all get along. But what about a woman who's not welcome with the other women? You talk about pretty awful. I got to make this trip every day by myself, unprotected, because nobody will welcome me. Okay? And she's going to go out there. She's going to draw water for cooking, for washing things, for bathing, whatever it was. Oof. Yeah, and Jesus is here saying, hey, I'll give you something, and you'll never thirst again. Now, the whole idea of it will become in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life, I think the idea is that you get a taste of this, you'll never be satisfied with anything else. You know, there's nothing else out there. Now, hopefully what we're seeing here as New Testament Christians is we're seeing a whole lot of things pointing us to Jesus being our satisfaction. Now, we're going to tie this in a minute. What's happening in chapter 6? He feeds people. What's happening in chapter 4? He's offering drink for people. You see what Jesus does? Jesus offers everything we need. Abundant water. Good, clean, fresh water. And abundant food. Jesus provides completely. And so she says, verse 15, Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst nor come here to draw. You still working on that. Oh, man. I want that water you're offering. I don't ever have to come back here. It's Aquafina. Never have to come back here again. I can take it home. You're still not getting it. So what does he do? Verse 16, he turns it a little, doesn't he? Go call your husband and come here. Oh, man. You know, Jesus had this incredible knack, because he's God, let me just say, of getting right to the point. He did it with Nicodemus, didn't he? He did it with Nathanael. Behold, an Israelite in whom there's no guile. He knows exactly what to say, when to say it, how to say it, where to say it, and who to say it to, and look at what happens. Go call your husband. You know, I don't know what she did, but I'm almost uncomfortable reading it. Verse 17, she says, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, you said well, I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you have now is not your husband. In that you spoke truly. She does what a lot of people do. She acknowledges the truth as much as she has to, and just kind of doesn't acknowledge as much as the rest of the stuff. Ooh. Now, here's something to think about. When I've heard this taught, generally speaking, I've heard rocks just thrown at this poor woman. Oh, man, adulteress, you know, multiple divorcee, whatever. You know, the fact is, the text doesn't say that, does it? Now, here's the thing. It would probably be fair. It would probably be fair to make the assumption that she's been divorced maybe a couple of times. She probably has been widowed a couple of times. It would, I mean, especially if you're talking about 5. Okay, 5 times, you're probably going to hit it right on some of that. But maybe don't color her in quite as awful as what we sometimes think. And it is worth noting, you know, it was really, really tough for a Jewish woman. And again, that's Jewish woman, not necessarily Samaritan. But it was really tough for a Jewish woman to secure a divorce from her husband. Really tough. Generally speaking, she either had to pay him to do it, or she had to approach the elders of the city, or maybe even go to the council. She had to go to somebody in position of leadership who could then make the divorce happen for her on her behalf. Okay? Very tough. Very tough to do that. It makes no difference to the point of the text, though. In either case, a woman who's been married this many times, whether it's divorced, whether it's widow, makes no difference. If she's been married this many times, everybody in Samaria is just kind of like, stay over there. And the Jews, especially, arm's length. We don't want to deal with you. You getting a little bit of something here? You know, here's this woman who would have been ostracized, and who's sitting there talking to her? Yeah, Jesus. Yeah. I mean, you know, you think about some of the stories in the Synoptics, you know, the woman, well, we're going to get to John 8, the woman caught in adultery. Or you think of the woman in Luke 7 who comes into Simon's house and cries over his feet and washes his feet and dries them with her hair. And everybody in the room's like, Simon in particular is like, if he knew who she was, you know. Look at Jesus, though. Look at what Jesus is doing. Y'all getting something out of that? So I'm going to throw you a curveball. One of your questions is, what does this reading reveal about Jesus? So what do you think? What does this reading so far? Now, we want to get into a little bit more here, but so far, what does this reading reveal about Jesus?
I tell you what, his knowledge of everything that's unfolding, he's the ultimate statesman. The way
Okay.
you ask the questions and get heard.
Yeah. He is the ultimate personal interactor, isn't he? He has the ability to work with people. What's something else, Julie?
I'd say he's direct, but with compassion.
Oh, I love that. He is direct. There's no mistake about it. He is very direct. I mean, he goes right from, oh, you want the water? Bring your husbands. And he knows. We already found out he knows all this stuff. I mean, look at chapter 4, verse 1. He knows things. You don't think he knew? He knew exactly what to ask. But he does so with compassion. What's he doing here? He's not trying to whittle in a little bit of pain, a little salt in the wound. He is directing her. Exactly. He is taking this conversation to the targeted place it's supposed to be. You understand, when he asked this, you know, what do we do in this world today? We might ask some question like that. Or are you married and the person goes, my ex was a deadbeat. And you go, whoops, I've walked into something. You know that Jesus did not do whoops just now? He did not go, whoops, I've walked into something. I should not have asked about her husband. No. Like Julie said, he is targeted. He knows what he's working on. He knows why he's saying what he's saying. He is working this woman to a particular end. And boy, if this story doesn't just get cooler and cooler with every verse, right? Well, that's where we're going. So he says, yeah, you spoke the truth. Yeah, you're married, or you've been married 5 times, and the one you're with now is not your husband. Yeah, that's probably a hint towards fornication. She's living with this guy, and they're not married. They're playing like husband and wife, but they're not husband and wife. And so she says, I perceive, verse 19, I perceive you are a prophet. Well, understatement of the century, right? So you notice, she says, what he has just revealed, oh, it means something. He's somebody. The cool thing is, everybody in John so far has thought Jesus is somebody. They're wondering if he's the somebody. She doesn't quite know what he is yet or who he is yet. She knows he's somebody. I want to tie back into something I said earlier about the Samaritans. They believed in the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses. What that means then, guys, is they had a view of a Messiah. But it was not the Messiah. It was not the Messiah that Jews believed was coming. The Jews believed in a kingship Messiah. They believed in a Savior Messiah, one who would come in and root out the enemies. But the Samaritans believed in what they called the Teheb, and it was a teaching Messiah. You know why that is, right? Because Deuteronomy talked about the one who would come after Moses and teach them, a prophet. Oh, you see where I'm tying in now? That's Deuteronomy 17 and 18. So you have this imagery coming along where she's now thinking, oh, is he a prophet? Is he a prophet? Verse 20. So sometimes this has been colored up. She's dodging the issue. He just touched on something really uncomfortable. She's changing the subject. That's not fair at all. I think context bears that out. Go ahead.
You know, it's really interesting to me what the devil has done in time.
Yeah.
Like, that Jesus could walk up to this woman and say these words, and that's spitting truth.
Yeah.
Like, you are spitting the truth here.
Yeah.
And people are looking aghast, like, ooh.
Yeah.
But they're like, it's true. Now, if Brother Estes walked up, not that I'm saying he's Jesus, but if he walked up to a woman and looked at her and said, well, how about the 5 women, 5 husbands you have now? Still not the one. You know, he would be condescending.
Yeah.
And the devil has made truth speaking such a horrible thing.
That is a great connection to make. It is fascinating, though. Take comfort in this fact. How many churches would welcome the preaching of Jesus today? Yeah, not very many, guys. Not very many. And that's not even addressing some of the moral issues like LGBTQ. If Jesus just comes in and talks about marriage, there's going to be some members leave. And you talk, lots of churches. But our job then is to speak the truth in love. We can't hide behind, okay? We can't hide behind, this facade of compassion. True compassion speaks the truth in love. You seeing that with Jesus here? Not pleasant, guys. It is not pleasant. I promise. In fact, I agonized. I will tell you a little bit right now. I agonized over my lesson Sunday. That's part of my work. I don't enjoy preaching hard lessons, and I don't enjoy preaching really hard points, but that's my job. And you'll hear me say this many times in the pulpit. I love you, and I love God, and I love His Word, and you better believe it. I will answer to God for what I don't preach on. And I love my soul just enough to preach on those hard subjects. But boy, you see Jesus, Jesus just comes right out and says, here's what's going on. We need to address it. We need to address it. Do it in love, but we need to address it. So she says, you're a prophet. Verse 20, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship. So you think here how this ties in with what I said earlier. The Samaritans had built a temple at Mount Gerizim, okay, and so they have their own temple complex. Of course, it's been destroyed by this time. John Hyrcanus destroys it. So they're basically worshiping at an old ruined temple site, okay? But they would not make the journeys to Jerusalem for any feasts. They didn't do that. And so she's now saying, okay, well, you're a prophet. Maybe you can fix this issue. We have always worshipped here at Gerizim. You Jews have always worshipped down at Jerusalem. Which one's right? And Jesus says, verse 21, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. You talk about an exceptional communicator. Jesus says, I'm not getting into all the debate. I'm not going through all of that. But we're worshiping in the truth. So he essentially says, you're missing the point. All this debate about Gerizim or Jerusalem, you're really missing the point. But if you want my answer, we worship what we know. The Jews had it right. The Jews were doing the right stuff, not always in the right way, and not always from the right heart, but the Jews understood who they were worshiping, and that's a big part of what's going on here. You notice the immediacy of what he says. The hour is coming. Yeah, but we're going to get down here a few verses, and he's going to say the hour is now. So, we're seeing this anticipatory thing, but at the same time, he's saying it's happening. We're starting it right now. This is going on. So, you'll neither worship on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. Okay, so verse 22, I want to hurry. Verse 22, salvation is of the Jews. Okay, probably a subtle nod here to Jesus himself being salvation, because he is of the Jews. He's the Messiah. Salvation will come through, and that's where this is going. So verse 23, let's get into this. Verse 23, the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and truth. Now, lots going on here. I'll only say this, probably a well-known text. I don't think this text really means what we generally make it mean. Generally speaking, the way we present this is we need to focus on the right form and the right feeling. That's true, 100% true. And this text will support that a little bit. I don't think that's the main point of the text. If you're thinking with me a minute, the Samaritans believed in a smaller Old Testament. They had a fractured view of God. So you see in what he says earlier, you worship what you don't know. They're claiming to worship God, but they didn't even have half the Old Testament. They were worshiping God, but it was not a full picture of God. He says, we know what we worship. Because the Jews followed the full Old Testament. They had a fuller picture of God. Okay? And that's why he goes into all this discussion about the identity of God. God is a spirit. God is spirit. They needed to understand who God is. If you're going to worship God, you got to know who God is. Worship is rooted in Him and who He is. You got to know the who of your worship before you can ever get the what or the how or the why. Did y'all understand that was a lot? I know, but so important. We start with the who of our worship. That helps us see our what, our how, and our why. And if we get one of those numbers off, generally speaking, it's because we don't know the who. All that goes back to Him. Now, of course, this concludes, I know the Messiah is coming, and when He comes, He will tell us all things. You see in that, they had this idea of a Savior, of a Messiah who would teach them. See, she says, He'll teach us when He gets here. And Jesus says, I am Him. That's awesome. You know that so far in this Gospel of John, Jesus has not revealed His true identity to anybody yet. And who does He do it to first? A Samaritan nobody. Is that not the coolest thing ever? I mean, you talk about an outcast of outcasts. Everybody so far has been wondering who this dude is, and He finally tells a Samaritan woman. That's cool. All right. All right, I know that was the bell. Do you have an application that you're just itching to throw out? Okay, nobody's itching. All right, let me give you my applications in because I know that was, we've got about 30 seconds. So number one, be impressed by Jesus' daily sacrifice. Here's where I'm going with that. He's tired at a well in the middle of the day. You stop and think about what all He gave up daily to be the Savior and walk the earth. Man, I've thought about this before. Did Jesus ever have the stomach bug? If I was given the option of never coming to the earth and never having a stomach bug, I'd probably take it. Okay? Don't give me the stomach bug. It's not pretty at all. Meredith will tell you. Number two, the gift of God is for all, even a Samaritan woman. Guys, we're sitting here tonight because we're part of that same category of outcasts. And then number three, true and lasting satisfaction comes from Jesus. We get a little of that in John 4. Here's water that will never make you thirsty again. We're going to get it again in John 6. He's providing the bread from heaven. Guys, Jesus provides everything we need, and if we'll look to Him, we'll be satisfied. Number four, no area is off limits to the gospel and our King. Julie's point earlier, I've had individuals tell me, that's none of your business. Well, wait a minute now. There is no subject off limits to the King. The gospel's here, folks, and it talks about our marriages. It talks about the way we dress. It talks about the way we live. It talks about the things we think, the things we say, the things we feel. There is no area off limits. That's none of your business. Well, it may not be my personal business, but it is this church's business, generally speaking, and you better believe it's God's business. Okay? Nothing's off limits to Him. And then number five, true worship is rooted in the identity of God, and true worshipers seek to reflect the identity of God. I think that's so important. We get into texts like this and just be thinking about how this plays in. Two big factors play into John 4. Evangelism, and we're going to get that more in the next section, and true worship. True worship is rooted in the truth of God. Okay? Where you get some of that truth stuff there. I can't believe I finished that early. You got about 20 seconds. Okay, no, you have negative 3 seconds now. I think they're doing that on purpose at this point. So thank you for your careful attention, and I will call on Helvey to lead our prayer on Sunday in retaliation. But thank you for your careful attention, and we'll pick back up with the last half of chapter 4 on Sunday.